often amounting to 50 films a year. It has gained a dominant position within the Arab world, managing to break through language barriers by familiarizing other Arab countries with its particular dialect. Once Egyptian cinema became independent, it was perceived as troublesome rather, by the colonizers in the neighboring Arab countries. We'll be speaking more about this topic with the cinema critic Ahmed Shawi. I'd like to thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning.
Mr. Ahmed, thanks for joining us. And we'd like to just start off that since the 2011 revolution, it seems that the film in Egypt, especially the documentary filmmaking, has taken a new approach. How far and true is this statement?
I think the statement is true. Of course, the cinema generally and the documentary films especially has a new approach. But I cannot relate it too much to the 2011 revolution. It's one of the of the factors, of many factors. I think the main factor of this breakthrough was.
So you think that started before the 2011 revolution?
Starting from the digital shooting.
Okay.
From the day that people managed to shoot their movies using live cameras without needing huge equipments or huge budgets. That really was the first step all over the world to making films more easy for everyone. Now every young talented filmmaker, or even not talented, can take his camera and shoot a film. So that's a thing. Of course, after the revolution, it became more free to do so. Egypt became more important point for the fundraisers and for the people who are willing to fund projects, cinema projects. So that also helped, of course.
Yes, and right after the 25th of January revolution, it was really easy, like you mentioned, take a camera and shoot anywhere. But this gradually was restricted, because now you're allowed to do so, but not everywhere. You need certain permissions in certain places.
Actually, that was our whole history with the camera. I remember the great critic Sami Salamoni, the great late critics, once when he was talking about the beginning film of Muhammad Khan, Darb al-Shams, which was completely shot outside the studio and streets. He described Cairo that it is a city who hates photo shooting. Every single shot you take in Cairo streets is a problem. If not because of the government and the permissions, you can find a problem because of the people who are divided into people who don't want you to shoot and people who want to be shoot in your frame. So it was always a problem to shoot outside the studio in Egypt, but with the size and the weight of the cameras, with the new techniques of shooting, I think regardless to the permissions and to the governmental.
You think it's become easier?
Yes, it's become easier, of course.
Okay. Well, what in your opinion do you think makes a good cinema critic? And how can a critic actually contribute to the flourishing of cinema?
That's a tough question. I think what makes a cinema critic, it's the same elements that make any person who have a talent or have a contribution. Of course, you have to know well the field you are dealing with, the cinema. You have to be a cinema fan. You have to watch a lot of movies, read about the cinema and about the world and the art generally. That's conditions that must be in everyone who are in this field. But what makes a cinema critic a unique one or a good one, I think, is beside all this, he has to have the talent. I don't think it's an easy way, because many people now think it's normal to write about a movie. Of course it's normal. It's everyone's right to tell his opinion about what he watched or what he listened to. But how do you say it? That's the point. It's half a talent and half a profession and a craft.
Of course, it has to have a constructive background in order to give a constructive feedback. But young generations, like you are, definitely has this, skills, technology, backgrounds, So definitely with the ways that you see movies and your ability to see past movies and compare movies and use technology to do so and use the internet to do so, it gives you the edge some way or another. How would you describe the characteristics of the young generation of cinema critics?
I can prescribe our generation of cinema critics as a lucky one. Exactly as you mentioned, everything is available now. When you read about the history of this profession in Egypt, you can find many struggles of people just trying to see movies. In the 60s and 70s, there was these cultural places, cultural centers of the embassies who screen only one film per week or sometimes per month. People came to Cairo from everywhere to Egypt to attend a film, for example, in the Italian Culture Center or in the Czech Culture Center. That was a tough thing to think about. When I think about our current situation now I have everything at my home. I can easily access to most of the new films and books everywhere. Even on my daily working process, finding an information or data about a film became very accessible and approachable.
Yes.
Sure.
But do you have to have the technical skill also? Because does it make you a better critic when you have editing background, when you have shooting background, because you know the angles, you know the techniques too, and the technical specs?
I believe so. I believe so, but it's not a must, because all over the world there is a very good film critics who never practiced cinema, who never shoot a movie by themselves. But in my case and in many of my friends' cases, I think that it's very helpful to have this background, because in everything in the world, not only cinema, practicing the thing is
practice makes perfect.
Yes, of course.
And how do you see the cinema criticism in the Arab world and in Egypt in comparison to Europe and the States?
If we want to try to...
Is there like a huge gap, do you think, in your opinion?
There is a huge difference. Okay. But it's not only about the criticism. If we want to compare between our situation in cinema criticism, and what's happening in Europe and in the western side of the world, we cannot make it simple without dealing with the whole context of the cinema industry and the cinema culture in the countries. As in the West, for their fortunate, cinema is a thing settled in their culture. People deal with cinema as a fine art. And of course, there is a huge number of films, there is a huge production every day. But when we think about what's happening here, we have a lackness of all of this. The number of films produced yearly is
dropping.
Of course, it's dropping, and even
just due to other factors.
Yes, there are many factors adding to this conflict. But what I think is we are going through the good way.
I was just going to tell you, how can you better cinema criticism, in your opinion, and we'd be able to sort of make the gap closer a little bit, as much as we can, in your opinion?
I don't think we can make the gap closer in the field of criticism without narrowing
the industry altogether.
Yeah, the total gap in the industry. But what we are trying to do, I'm talking about myself and my generation, is to make the gap less in the field of quality, in the words of quality. But the quantity, of course, it's not our thing to decide.
It's not in our favor. If I speak about the cinema festivals that happens in Egypt, there's a lot of festivals that actually takes place, but I want your open opinion about those festivals and the quality of the festivals and the quality also of the participation.
I think there are some good film festivals in Egypt when you compare it to our situation. Days ago, we have just finished the European Film Panorama.
Yes.
It's not an official festival, it's a panorama of European movies, but it became a very good ceremony. For 6 years, people are eager to watch films in this panorama. Of course, we have other festivals, the National Film Festival, the Cairo Film Festival, which will not be held this year, but will take place the next year.
But we just had one, the 17th Egyptian National Film Festival that
Yes,
just took
exactly.
place recently, and I
Yes.
think you participated.
Yes, of course.
And we hadn't had any since the January 25th revolution.
Yes, it's the first edition of the National Film Festival that be held after the
After the
revolution.
revolution,
Yes,
yeah.
it
It's been
stopped
quite
for
some
2
time,
years.
yes. Yeah.
For 2011 and 12, it was stopped because of the circumstances, but it came back this year. Because of it was collecting so many years, so I participated with 3 short movies I made in the festival. I made it on 2010 and 2011, but because of collecting many years, they all were screened in
You
the
can
same.
tell us about them? They're documentaries or what
One
were
of them
they?
was a documentary. They are very short movies. Each one was 3 minutes. One is a documentary shooted on March 2011, just
right after the
one
revolution.
month after the revolution. It was premiered in Paris and then screened in Tahrir Square and some other places. And the 2 other films, I made them 2010, before the revolution. One of them was an experimental shooting in black and white, and the other one was a short fiction.
Perfect. Finally, Ahmed Shawi, cinema critic, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us. It has been a great pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much.
And now we will be moving on to another segment. We have a report about our famous music composer Ammar al-Shari'i, who just died recently. And we will be having the report. Stay with us and see it.